This video was brought to you by Imprint. Despite their historical differences, Poland has been one of Ukraine's most ardent allies since Putin invaded in February of last year. Poland has sent more than its fair share of military support, and even pressured other NATO allies, most notably Germany, into stepping up their support too. However, cracks in the relationship first began to appear in April, when Poland banned Ukrainian grain imports in order to protect its domestic agricultural industry. And tensions have rapidly escalated in the last few days too, after Poland unilaterally extended the restrictions last week. In response, Zelensky accused Poland of turning grain into a thriller, provoking the Polish president into comparing Ukraine to a drowning man, and the Polish prime minister then to abruptly announce that Poland would no longer be providing Ukraine with military aid. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the dispute over grain imports, how it escalated into a diplomatic feud, and what might happen next. Just quickly, we announced recently that we're making a physical TLDR newspaper. So if you want to learn more or order this pretty silly one-off collector's item, then there's a link to the announcement video and the store in the description. Pre-orders close October 1st. So let's start with a bit of context. Before the invasion, Poland and Ukraine actually had a pretty complicated relationship. Poles and Ukrainians have fought numerous wars against one another since the 17th century, with the worst violence coming during World War II. And even in the last decade or so, the Polish and Ukrainian governments have occasionally butted heads over the correct characterization of what happened in World War II. Nonetheless, despite their historical disagreements, the two countries have been united by Putin's invasion and Poland's impressive support for Ukraine. Measured as a percentage of GDP, Poland has sent more immediate military aid to Ukraine than any other country apart from the Baltics, and has received nearly 2 million Ukrainian refugees, by far the most anywhere in Europe. On top of that, the Polish government has been reliably one of the most hawkish voices in NATO, constantly pushing its NATO allies to give Ukraine more military aid or impose more sanctions on Russia. Poland was also the first country to give Ukraine jets, and the Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, has spoken in the past about his responsibility to wake up the rest of Europe to the real threat of Russian aggression. However, cracks in this relationship started showing up earlier this year, when Poland, along with a bunch of other Central European countries, said that they would be banning Ukrainian grain imports because they were undercutting Polish farmers, who couldn't compete with the super cheap Ukrainian grain. For context, Ukraine is an absolute agricultural export powerhouse, sometimes even nicknamed the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine has the most arable land of any country in Europe excluding Russia, and before the war, Ukraine's food exports provided calories to feed about 400 million people, with Ukraine accounting for something like 10% of the world's wheat exports, 16% of its maize, and roughly 50% of its sunflower oil. However, in part because of the EU's protective agricultural policies, before the war, Ukraine exported most of its produce not to Europe, but to the rest of the world via the Black Sea. But obviously, exporting via the Black Sea became nearly impossible when Russia invaded, and the problem has returned now that Putin has withdrawn from the Black Sea grain deal. And this has left Ukrainian farmers sitting on a whole lot of grain. In 2022, Ukrainian farmers harvested about 27 million tons of wheat, only about 5% under the pre-war average, and successfully planted about 80% of 2023's wheat. Now, the Ukrainians have tried to export this massive amount of produce via other routes, including rail, road, and the Danube River. But Russia has now started attacking ports on the Danube, and export volumes are down more than 75%, leaving something like 20 million tons of produce just stuck in the country. This is why in May of 2022, the EU announced that they'd be removing all trade barriers on Ukrainian exports in order to, quote, mitigate the negative economic impact of Putin's invasion and support the Ukrainian authorities. While this measure was originally supported by most of the EU, Ukraine's cheap foodstuffs, made even cheaper by the post-war weakness of the Ukrainian currency, quickly started undercutting European farmers. So in January, agriculture ministers from 6 European countries demanded limits on Ukrainian imports and compensation for affected farmers, arguing that while they supported Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression, the 10,000% rise in Ukrainian food imports had caused serious market disturbances. Now, while the EU did dish out some compensation from the Agricultural Crisis Reserve, this wasn't apparently enough. So in April, they decided to unilaterally limit imports of Ukrainian produce in contravention of EU law. The EU eventually agreed to temporarily back these restrictions, but they were supposedly meant to expire this week. But then, last Friday, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary announced that they would be extending the ban indefinitely. This didn't go down well with Ukraine, and on Tuesday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky put out a dramatic tweet accusing the Polish government of playing, quote, political theatre and setting the stage for a Moscow actor. Somewhat unsurprisingly, this prompted a furious reaction from Poland, which summoned the Ukrainian ambassador and warned Ukraine not to push the issue further. Then on Tuesday at the UN summit in New York, Poland's president Andrzej Duda made an astonishing speech where he likened Ukraine to a drowning person who runs the risk of bringing down their rescuer. In response, Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Oleg Nikolenko urged, quote, our Polish friends to put aside their emotions. But this wasn't enough, and on Wednesday, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki warned that Poland could expand the ban and that Poland would no longer be sending arms to Ukraine. Morawiecki didn't explicitly link the withdrawal of military support to the grain issue, and instead claimed that it was because Poland needed to invest in its own military. But it's hard to believe that the timing was entirely coincidental. Morawiecki also clearly has his eye on the upcoming Polish election, due in mid-October. An agricultural minister has already had to resign over this issue, and Morawiecki will be worried that the problem of Ukrainian grain could undermine his support among Polish farmers in the rural east. And these electoral issues also explain why on Monday, Poland announced that they'd be winding down the current level of support for Ukrainian refugees. And Poland's deputy agricultural minister warned that growing refugee fatigue in Poland was benefiting the far-right Confederation Party. All in all, while this move might be politically understandable from the Polish government's perspective, it's undeniably bad news for Ukraine. Not only is Ukraine falling out with one of its staunchest allies, but it's also yet more evidence that as the front lines stabilize and Ukraine falls out of the international headlines, the political consensus on support for Ukraine is fraying somewhat. It's perhaps also a sign that Ukraine might be best advised to tone down some of their more critical rhetoric, which was well received early on in the war, but has incurred some pushback from Ukraine's allies more recently. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you might enjoy Imprint's visual guide to the 48 Rules of Power, a book that's been described as an amoral, ruthless, and instructive guide for those interested in understanding and gaining power. But that's not the only thing you can learn. Just like TLDR, Imprint is all about helping you learn quickly, conveniently, and visually. It's super quick because most of their lessons take less than 2 minutes to complete, summarizing knowledge from all kinds of topics and using Harvard professors and best-selling authors to teach you key concepts. It's convenient because it's all housed in their easy-to-use mobile app, letting you replace doom scrolling with actual learning. And it's visual because, well, look at it. Their animated explanations help you stay focused, understand concepts quickly, and actually retain what you learn. So join the millions of users learning with Imprint, including me. I'm taking their multi-day flow course right now. And do that by using the link in the description. Plus, if you use that link, you'll get a 7-day free trial and get 20% off an annual plan when you sign up. And they'll know that you came from us. So check out Imprint, support our new sponsor, and thanks for watching TLDR.